My name is Marcus, and I'm going to tell you something that changed my entire understanding of reality. This happened to me a few years ago. It's not a story. It's not fiction. This is what actually occurred during a night shift when I was working as a nurse during the COVID pandemic. Before I get into what happened that night, I need to give you context. I need you to understand my state of mind at that time. Because what I experienced wouldn't have been possible if I hadn't been in a very specific place spiritually and mentally. In the months leading up to this event, I had been deep into meditation and what people call occult knowledge. And when I say occult, I don't mean witchcraft or devil worship, I mean hidden knowledge. Knowledge that exists outside of mainstream consciousness. I was reading books about energy, consciousness, the nature of reality, beyond the physical three-dimensional world that most people accept as all there is. I was practicing meditation regularly. I was learning about things like creating energy, balls, manipulating subtle energy with your consciousness. I was opening myself up to the reality that the world is much larger and much more complex than what we can see with our regular eyes. This matters because it made me sensitive. It made me aware. It made me able to perceive things that people locked into purely three-dimensional thinking wouldn't notice. I also need to tell you that by this point in my life, I could feel shifts in rooms. I could sense when the energy in a space changed. I wasn't looking for it. It just started happening naturally as I became more aware. It's like your consciousness becomes a tuning fork for subtle shifts in the environment. This is important because when I walked into my workplace that night, I was already in that state of awareness. I was working as a nurse at a subacute facility. That's a step-down unit from a full hospital. It's where patients go after they've been hospitalized but before they can go home. It's a critical care setting, but it's not an intensive care unit. We had patients who were recovering, patients who were stable, patients who were in their final days. It was night shift. That's 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. COVID was at its peak. The world was strange. Everything felt heavier, darker. There was a weight to being alive during that time that I think everyone felt. I got to work, and the first few hours were normal. Typical night shift. Checking on patients, doing charting, managing medications, the routine work of nursing. Nothing unusual. Nothing that stood out. But then something shifted. I was at the nursing station working on the computer. It was probably around 2 or 3 in the morning. That dead time when the night is at its deepest. That time when the barrier between the physical world and other dimensions feels thinnest. And the room suddenly got cold. Not gradually cold, instantly cold. Like someone had opened a door to winter. I felt shivers run down my spine. Not from being physically cold, from something else. From a presence. My coworker was nearby. Her name doesn't matter, but she was a good person. Kind. Conscientious. I said to her, "It's like a ghost is around." I said it half joking, but I meant it. I could feel something. She looked at me and said, "Please don't scare me. I feel it too. And I get scared easily." Then we both laughed because in that moment, the tension was too heavy. But we both knew. We both felt it. She walked back to her assignment, and I continued working at the computer. A few minutes later, and this is crucial to the story, something caught my eye. In my peripheral vision, to the side where I wasn't looking directly, I saw a figure, an old man, white guy, blue eyes. He was wearing a hospital gown. He had a walker. He was standing up, leaning on the walker, looking at me. And the moment I registered this and tried to look directly at him, he was gone. There was nothing there. I looked directly at the space where I'd seen him. Empty, no patient, no figure. Nothing, just the hallway. I didn't think much about it. I figured my mind was playing tricks. I was tired. It was 3 in the morning. The mind does weird things at that hour. Plus, I was busy with work. I had charting to do. I had medications to manage. I didn't dwell on it. Then my coworker came running back to the nursing station. She was panicked. She said, "Can you help me? One of my residents coded. Coded means they're unresponsive, means their heart might have stopped, means they're dying or already dead." She told me she was going to get the paperwork ready and call 911. She explained that since we're a subacute facility, not a full hospital, we don't have the full emergency response team on site. We need to call paramedics. She said the paramedics should be here shortly. She asked me to go into the room and start CPR. I said okay, and I went into the room. The patient was lying on the bed, and even before I checked him, I could tell. I could feel it. He was gone. He was already dead. There was an absence in the room, a silence that only death creates. But protocol is protocol. I had to do a sternum rub to see if he was responsive. You rub your knuckles on the sternum, the breastbone, to see if the patient reacts. It's a painful stimulus. A truly living person should react. He didn't react. I started CPR. I was doing compressions on his chest, pushing hard and fast, trying to get his heart beating again. But I wasn't getting anywhere. CPR almost never works outside of a hospital setting, and I could feel that this man was beyond reach. Soon after I started, the paramedics arrived. When paramedics show up, you relinquish control. You step back and let them do their job. You're just there to help if they need you or to give them information. So I stepped back from the bed, and then I walked around to the other side of the bed. I walked to where the patient's face was, because even during the coding, even when I was doing compressions, his head had been turned away from me. He was always looking away. I couldn't see his face clearly. When I walked around and looked at his face, when I finally saw him clearly, it hit me like a brick wall. It was the man from the hallway. It was the exact same man I'd seen in my peripheral vision just minutes earlier. The old man in the hospital gown with the walker, the blue eyes, the white guy. Everything matched, but he was lying in the bed, and the paramedics were working on him, and his eyes were open, and his mouth was open, and he was dead. And in that moment, in that millisecond where I recognized him, where I understood what I was seeing, something shifted in my entire being. Something clicked. A door opened in my consciousness that I couldn't close. I realized with absolute certainty that there is an afterlife. I realized that what I had seen in the hallway was not his physical body. It was his consciousness. It was his spirit. It was the part of him that continues to exist even when the body dies. And he had come to me, or I had sensed him, moments before he physically passed away. The realization was so profound, so visceral, that it physically stunned me. I remember standing there looking at his face, feeling like reality itself had cracked open and I could see through the seams to something much larger. He had a look on his face, confusion, like he didn't understand what was happening, like he was caught between the world he'd just left and the world he was about to enter. His expression was frozen in that moment of transition, that moment between life and death. It all happened in milliseconds. The paramedics were focused on their work. My coworker was handling the paperwork. Nobody else witnessed what I was witnessing. Nobody else made the connection that I was making. But I knew absolutely. I don't remember his name. I never learned it. It doesn't matter. What matters is that I saw him twice. Once in spirit form, and once in his physical body as he died. This was a few years ago, and I remember it like it was yesterday. Every detail is crystal clear. Every feeling is still there. It's burned into my memory in a way that normal experiences aren't. But this event didn't just happen in isolation. It triggered something in me. It made me research. It made me read more. It made me understand what had actually occurred. And what I've learned since then has completely reframed that night. First, I learned about medical facilities as spiritual portals. Hospitals and care facilities are places where the veil between worlds is very thin. Think about it. These are places where people are dying every single day, where consciousness is transitioning from the physical body into whatever comes next. The energy in these places is thick with spiritual activity. People die there regularly. Their spirits are often confused. They're looking for help. They're caught between worlds. The whole environment is saturated with spiritual presence. That's why I felt the cold. That's why the room shifted when the patient was dying. The whole space was thin. Second, I learned about peripheral vision and why spirits appear there. This is fascinating. Scientists have discovered that human peripheral vision is remarkably advanced, and there's a reason for this. Over thousands of years of human evolution, our peripheral vision was our survival mechanism. It allowed us to detect movement and threats that were approaching from the side. It allowed us to sense danger before it reached us directly. Our ancestors were hunter-gatherers. They drank from rivers and ponds. They needed to know if something was coming at them from the side or from behind. Our peripheral vision evolved to catch those subtle movements, those slight disturbances in the environment that meant danger. That advanced capacity for peripheral perception doesn't disappear just because we're no longer hunter-gatherers. It's still there. It's still working. And spirits, it seems, are able to interact with that peripheral awareness more easily than with our direct conscious vision. When you look directly at something, you're engaging your conscious mind. You're filtering the information through your expectations and your beliefs about what's possible. But when you perceive something in your peripheral vision, you're not filtering. You're just receiving. Your brain is processing information before your conscious mind has a chance to dismiss it as impossible. That's why ghosts and spirits almost always appear in peripheral vision. That's why the moment you turn to look directly, they vanish. Because your conscious mind is too strong. Your beliefs about what's real and what's not real are too powerful. They override the direct perception. That's exactly what happened to me that night. I saw him in my peripheral vision because that's the avenue through which spirits can communicate with us. That's where the veil is thinnest. I registered his presence without my conscious mind having a chance to dismiss it as impossible. But the moment I tried to look directly, to engage my conscious mind and my eyes in verifying what I'd seen, he was gone. Not because he wasn't real, but because my consciousness had intervened. My expectations about what should and shouldn't be possible had created a wall. But then, minutes later, I saw his body. I saw him with my direct vision. And in that moment, I understood what had happened. I made the connection. And the truth was undeniable. This has changed everything about how I understand the world. I've continued my meditation practice. I've continued reading about consciousness and spirituality. I've continued opening myself to the reality that we're living in a universe that's far more complex and far more alive than what mainstream science tells us. And I've realized something else. We're all capable of perceiving these things. We're all capable of sensing the spiritual dimension that exists alongside the physical dimension, but we've been taught not to. We've been taught that the only thing that's real is what we can see with our eyes and touch with our hands. We've been taught that anything else is imagination or delusion. But that's not true. The world is alive with consciousness. It's filled with spirits. It's layered with dimensions that exist alongside and interpenetrating the physical world we perceive. And if you open yourself to it, if you meditate, if you read, if you study, if you become sensitive to the subtle shifts in energy around you, you can perceive these things too. That night in the hospital changed me. It opened a door in my understanding that can never be closed. It showed me, with absolute certainty, that consciousness continues beyond the death of the physical body, that there is more to existence than the 3 dimensions we can measure and quantify. I'm sharing this story because I want you to understand. I want you to know that what I experienced is real. I want you to know that these experiences are possible. I want you to know that if you ever see something out of the corner of your eye, if you ever feel a sudden shift in temperature, if you ever sense a presence in a room, it's not your imagination. You're perceiving something real, something that exists in a dimension that most people have been taught to ignore. The man I saw that night is gone from the physical world. But he's not gone from existence. He's moved on to whatever comes next. And in his final moments, in his transition, he reached out. He made contact with someone who was sensitive enough to perceive him. That's a gift. That's an honor. And it's also a responsibility. Because once you know that the spiritual dimension is real, you can't go back to pretending it's not. You have to acknowledge it. You have to work with it. You have to live in awareness of the larger reality. I still work in healthcare. I'm still a nurse. And now every time I'm in a medical facility, I'm aware. I'm aware that the veil is thin there. I'm aware that spirits are present. I'm aware that people are transitioning. And I try to be present for that. I try to be helpful. I try to acknowledge the spiritual reality that's happening in those spaces even as I do the physical work of nursing, because both dimensions are real, both are important, and both require attention and respect. That night changed everything, and I'll remember it for the rest of my life. The man with the blue eyes, the walker, the confusion on his face as he transitioned, the absolute certainty that crashed into me when I realized what I was seeing. It was the night I knew, with total certainty, that death is not the end. It's just a transition, and the world is so much larger than we've been taught to believe.